Hey, friend. I had an interesting insight. I had an interesting insight today. I hesitate to call it an insight only because I knew this already, but I know I knew it already in some ways. But you never know when something you already know is gonna ring true in a new way, and you're gonna go, "Oh, that's what that thing I know means." And that thing that I have known for a while, but that rang true for me today, was the fact that I'm going to say it in the abstract and then I'll kind of talk through how it manifested. But the fact that boundaries equal trust. And what I mean by that, this is coming somewhat, a couple different contexts, but it's coming out of one very obvious and probably the primary one that I felt it in today was my relationship with my 5-year-old daughter, who loves nothing more than challenging a boundary. It almost seems like that's what she's neurologically programmed to do at this age. Who knew that this is how kids work or how relentless they can be? I mean, like it's endless, almost never ending. It's kind of, I feel it almost like a pressure gauge where it's like there are times when there's very low pressure and I feel like I'm just having a kind of free, easy exchange with her, and everything's cool. We're just doing whatever we're doing. We're playing, we're practicing, we're having breakfast or whatever we're doing. We're driving, right? Those times are few and far between right now. Most of the time, there's some sort of calling it an assault would be putting it in stark terms, but a full court press on some boundary or other. And it almost seems like it doesn't matter what boundary it is. It almost seems like the agenda is not to overcome a particular boundary. It's just to pick one nearby and push on it. And it's exhausting. I actually don't find it, I don't find it exhausting when I am present. When I'm really present in myself and I'm kind of in a place of I got my wits about me. I feel like I'm here and I'm in the game with her. I don't find it exhausting. There is an effort required. There is a certain level of poise, and it's kind of like almost like being on stage in a way, or the pressure or the tension, the focus that comes when you're teaching, like in a teaching role. You're standing in front of a class, you have something to teach, you're delivering whatever you're delivering, you're doing your thing as a teacher. There's a certain pressure to be with it. You're not supposed to space out. You're supposed to be present. You're supposed to be feeling the students, sensing whether it's landing, whether it's not landing, what might need clarification, whether I'm being clear, right? All that. It's a very dynamic and very alive state. And that's the state that is required to be in constant relationship to this ongoing kind of pushing on whatever boundaries nearby, because you really can't let down. You can't just throw up your hands and say, okay, I'm just not going to fight this right now. There's no doing that, really. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but it doesn't really, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it works that way. It just feels like, okay, now we're in this thing and I have to be present here in this way. And the surprising thing about this is that I find this over and over again, and I say that it showed up for me vividly today because it was just one of those days. I've had this experience before, but if I am willing to do that, if I will actually maintain my consciousness and be present and maintain those boundaries, in other words, not let someone who's challenging a boundary just push it over, you learn something, which is the agenda of that young person was not actually to destroy the boundary and get and move through the boundary and be able to do the thing or have the thing, whatever the boundary happens to be. Their agenda was not their deeper agenda. In their conscious mind, yes, that's what they wanted. But in their subconscious mind, and I think in a deeper kind of like spiritual place, that's not their agenda. Their agenda is to see what the parent will do, to see whether this boundary is real. And when they realize that the boundary is real, it's like she grounds into a state of trust. This morning, she had been offered an Apple Watch. Someone offered her an Apple Watch that they got a new one, and this was the old one. And both Katie and I have frequently reiterated, you're not getting a screen watch. You're not getting a phone, and you're not getting a screen watch. You're 5. No, this is not a thing. So, but this offer, of course, made it something that she was like, now she was kind of attached to it. And she pushed on this for about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. And it took me a moment to sort of fully arrive at like, okay, for a moment I was like, oh, now let's talk, we should talk about this with mama, we should have this offer to consider. And then there was a moment where I was like, this is not a negotiation, this is definitely a boundary. We're not giving a 5-year-old a screen watch. And I just kind of said that. I said, hon, it's not something, we've talked pretty definitively about not having a screen watch. It's not something that we're going to do. I don't want you to get your hopes up. We'll talk about it with mama, but I don't want you to get your hopes up. This isn't something we've agreed we're not going to do right now. And almost immediately, she dropped it, never came back to it, and I felt her energy settle. And I was like, wow, that is remarkable. And then 2 minutes later, it was the next thing. It was the next, can I have this? We were at a store. Can I have this? I want this. I really need this. I don't want this. I need this for my alicorn. I need this for my alicorn. You don't understand, Papa. I don't just want this for my alicorn. I need it for my alicorn. And it went from there all pretty much all day. But at each moment, I think I was set up well by this kind of like early in the day experience, because it gave me such a powerful impression of the result of setting a clear boundary. It wasn't and I didn't obviously do it in a kind of in like a way that communicated frustration with her desire. I just pretty definitively said, this is not going to happen. And I think, and the result of that, and watching the impact of that, was so revelatory that I think it helped me throughout the rest of the day realize, oh, okay, here we are again. It doesn't mean that I never gave in to one of her desires. It just means it signaled to me, like at each moment where I could tell a boundary was being tested, I felt empowered that the process of holding the boundary was a process of deepening her trust in me, deepening my daughter's trust in herself, and deepening my daughter's trust in the world, that there are actually boundaries you can push on and they don't move. This is one of the things that I've heard child psychologists, developmental psychologists talk about, that when children don't learn that, when children feel like they can push on any boundary and it'll move, it's almost like they get vertigo in the world because nothing is solid. And it can be a really destabilizing experience to never receive pushback, never receive a boundary that's clear and solid and that actually does what it says it's going to do. This is kind of like, I mean, I've read a handful of parenting books, but the ones that I've read that speak to this have made a pretty compelling argument against being overly permissive, not just because you can spoil the kid, but also because it is destabilizing to not have clarity about where boundaries are. Boundaries create trust. And watching that mechanism today, and then feeling that throughout the day, I almost felt like I got a couple more examples of that where I just maintained something and I was firm and kind of like clear, and I had a sense of clarity in myself for why. It created not only like do we just move past it as an issue, didn't have to talk about it anymore, but there was almost like an added, I wouldn't call it affection, but like an added sense of like, I'm with you. I trust you, coming from her, because I had said no again and again, right? It's kind of counterintuitive and weird, and obviously it depends on how you say no and why you're saying no. If you don't have clarity on why the boundary is a good boundary and you just maintain it because you're not going to give in, well, then that's going to create a very different result, which I've done that too, by the way, and that's way less fun, and it does not create trust. but when it is just a kind of real poised firmness about this is a real boundary and we're not negotiating it, it creates trust. It's kind of remarkable. It's an amazing thing to watch, and it builds my trust in myself, because it's like, okay, I can actually identify when this is something that should be negotiated, when this is something that rightfully should be a conversation, and we need to either come to a compromise, or maybe I'll be convinced, or there should be some flexibility here, whatever. Or when a boundary's simply being tested and the right answer is no, this is a real boundary, because it generates that feeling of like, oh yeah, there are things in the world I can push on and they won't move. So that's what I'm imbibing after this rather a good solid day of that. I don't know how many examples I could come up with if I thought about it, but a dozen, probably more, probably many more, probably like a dozen big ones, reasonably big ones, and then inestimable little ones. But I wanted to clock that recognition for myself and also share it, because I think it's true, not just with 5-year-olds, not just with interpersonal relationships, but also within ourselves. I think it has a lot of application to how we can create a sense of trust in ourselves and in others. So please let me know how this applies to your life, if it does, or how you've experienced this phenomenon in your life. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.